Case 1. Rachel Henry, the Phoenix Apartment Horror. January 21st, 2020. A quiet Phoenix apartment complex. Inside Unit Number 203, a scene so horrific that even veteran first responders would struggle to process what they encountered. 3 children. 3 beautiful, innocent children. All under the age of 4. All positioned carefully in their beds, as if peacefully sleeping. But they weren't sleeping. They would never wake up again. Their mother, 22-year-old Rachel Henry, had just committed one of the most heinous crimes in Arizona history, the systematic murder of her own 3 babies. Let's remember these precious children by name, because they deserve to be more than statistics in a true crime case. 3-year-old Zane Henry, 1-year-old Mariah Henry, and 7-month-old Catalea Rios. 3 siblings who shared a mother, shared a home, and on that terrible January night, shared the same tragic fate. These weren't children who died from neglect or accident. This wasn't a case of a mother who lost control for a single, terrible moment. What Rachel Henry did was deliberate, methodical, and unspeakably cruel. The details that emerged during the investigation painted a picture of calculated horror. Rachel Henry didn't kill her children in a fit of rage. She didn't use a weapon. She used something far more intimate and disturbing, her own hands. One by one, Rachel Henry suffocated each of her 3 children. Investigators believe she used a combination of smothering and strangulation. The medical examiner would later confirm that each child died from asphyxiation. But perhaps the most chilling aspect of this crime wasn't just the murders themselves. It was what Rachel Henry did afterward. After taking the lives of her 3 children, she carefully positioned their small bodies in their beds. She arranged them as if they were simply sleeping. She tucked them in, made them look peaceful. Then she sang to them. Yes, you heard that correctly. After murdering her children, Rachel Henry sang to their lifeless bodies. When police arrived at the apartment, responding to a call from Rachel's family member who had become concerned, they found Rachel Henry sitting calmly in the residence. She didn't run. She didn't hide. She didn't even initially deny what she'd done. Detective work in cases involving the deaths of children is among the most emotionally taxing work in law enforcement. The Phoenix Police Department's investigators had to piece together not just what happened, but why. Rachel Henry was initially taken into custody and transported to a hospital for evaluation. The question on everyone's mind: what could possibly drive a mother to systematically murder her own babies? During interviews with police, Rachel Henry's statements were described as bizarre and inconsistent. At times, she seemed disconnected from reality. At other times, she appeared to understand exactly what she had done. The investigation revealed that Rachel Henry had been living in the apartment with her 3 children and her boyfriend, who was the father of the youngest child, 7-month-old Catalea. The boyfriend had left for work that evening, leaving Rachel alone with the children. When he returned home later that night, he made the horrific discovery. The children were unresponsive. He immediately called 911, but it was far too late. All 3 children were pronounced dead at the scene. As news of the triple murder spread throughout Phoenix and across the nation, many people asked the inevitable question: was Rachel Henry mentally ill? The defense team would indeed argue that Rachel Henry was suffering from severe mental health issues at the time of the murders. Evaluations were ordered. Psychiatric experts examined her. The court had to determine whether she was even competent to stand trial. But here's what's important to understand. Mental illness, even severe mental illness, doesn't automatically mean someone isn't responsible for their crimes. The legal system had to determine whether Rachel Henry knew right from wrong at the time she killed her children. After extensive evaluation, the court found Rachel Henry competent to stand trial and to understand the charges against her. Rachel Henry was charged with 3 counts of first-degree murder. In Arizona, first-degree murder carries the possibility of the death penalty or natural life in prison without the possibility of parole. The case moved through the court system slowly, as these complex cases often do. There were motions filed, psychiatric evaluations conducted, and extensive legal wrangling over the admissibility of evidence and statements Rachel Henry had made. The prosecution had overwhelming evidence. The physical evidence at the scene. The medical examiner's findings. Rachel Henry's own statements. This wasn't a whodunit mystery. Everyone knew who had killed these children. The question was what degree of murder she would be convicted of and what sentence she would receive. In a development that surprised some court observers, Rachel Henry ultimately entered a guilty plea. On February 10, 2025, she pleaded guilty to 3 counts of first-degree murder. By pleading guilty, Rachel Henry avoided a lengthy trial that would have forced family members to relive the horror in excruciating detail. But she also gave up her right to appeal the conviction. At her sentencing hearing, the courtroom was filled with family members of the victims, grandparents, aunts, uncles, and others who loved Zane, Mariah, and Catalea. Many wore shirts bearing the children's photographs. The pain in that courtroom was palpable. Family members were given the opportunity to address the court and to speak directly to Rachel Henry. Their victim impact statements were heartbreaking. They spoke of birthday parties that would never happen, first days of school that would never come, graduations, weddings, grandchildren, an entire future erased by one person's unfathomable actions. Rachel Henry herself made a statement to the court. She expressed remorse for what she had done. She apologized to the family members. But no words could undo what had been done. No apology could bring back 3 innocent lives. The judge, in pronouncing sentence, noted the particular cruelty of the crimes, the vulnerability of the victims, the breach of trust inherent in a mother murdering her own children, and the need to protect society from someone capable of such acts. Rachel Henry was sentenced to natural life in prison without the possibility of parole on each of the 3 murder counts. The sentences are to run consecutively, meaning she received 3 natural life sentences. Rachel Henry will spend the rest of her life behind bars. She will never know freedom again. She will grow old in prison, while the children she killed will remain forever young in the memories of those who loved them. The impact of this crime rippled far beyond the immediate family. The Phoenix community was shaken. Parents held their children a little tighter. People struggled to understand how such a thing could happen. There were questions about whether there had been warning signs, whether the child welfare system had missed something, whether someone could have intervened to prevent this tragedy. The painful truth is that in many cases of maternal filicide, there are no obvious red flags. Many mothers who kill their children have no prior history of violence, no documented mental health crises, no previous involvement with child protective services. Rachel Henry's case became part of a larger conversation about maternal mental health, postpartum depression and psychosis, and the support systems available to struggling mothers. But it's important to note that the vast majority of mothers suffering from mental health issues never harm their children. What Rachel Henry did was not typical of mental illness. It was an act of extreme violence. Today, Rachel Henry is incarcerated in the Arizona Department of Corrections. She is 27 years old. She has spent the past 5 years behind bars and will spend the next 5 decades and beyond in the same place. She will never attend another birthday party, never celebrate another holiday with family, never hold a child in her arms again. The prison cell is her world now, and it will remain her world until she draws her final breath. Meanwhile, 3 graves in a Phoenix cemetery mark the final resting places of Zane, Mariah, and Catalea. 3 children who should be in elementary school right now. 3 lives that mattered. 3 souls taken far too soon by the person who was supposed to protect them above all others. The case of Rachel Henry stands as one of the most disturbing examples of maternal filicide in Arizona history. It's a stark reminder that sometimes the greatest danger to a child comes not from a stranger, but from within their own home. If this case has impacted you, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe to Cold Case Time for more in-depth true crime documentaries. Your support helps us continue bringing these important stories to light. Case 2. Retta Cruse, the Phoenix Double Filicide. Phoenix, Arizona. March 3, 2021. Inside a residence in the southern part of the city, 2 young sisters lay dead, poisoned by the one person who should have moved heaven and earth to keep them safe, their own mother. This is the case of Retta Cruse, a 40-year-old mother who made a decision so unthinkable, so final, that it would end not just the lives of her 2 daughters, but eventually her own life as well. The deaths of 4-year-old Zariah Atwell and 9-year-old Zarina Cruse shocked the Phoenix community and raised painful questions about what drives a mother to kill her own children. Zariah and Zarina, 2 sisters with names that started with the same letter, bound together not just by blood, but by shared experiences, shared laughter, shared dreams for the future. 9-year-old Zarina was in elementary school. She had friends, teachers who cared about her, a whole life ahead of her. 4-year-old Zariah was just beginning to experience the world, that magical age when everything is new and wondrous. These girls didn't die in an accident. They didn't succumb to illness. They were deliberately killed by their mother, Retta Cruse, who chose to end their lives before ending her own failed attempt at suicide. On that March day in 2021, Retta Cruse gave her 2 young daughters substances that would prove fatal. The exact mechanism of death, whether it was medication, poison, or some other substance, has not been fully disclosed in public records, but investigators confirmed that both children died from being drugged by their mother. After killing her daughters, Retta Cruse attempted to take her own life. Her suicide attempt was unsuccessful, and she survived. When first responders arrived at the scene, they found the 2 children already deceased and Retta Cruse in medical distress. The scene was one of devastating loss. 2 young lives extinguished. A mother who had made an irreversible decision that would haunt everyone connected to this case. Phoenix Police Department homicide detectives were called to the scene. What they found was clear evidence of a double murder-suicide attempt. Retta Cruse had deliberately killed her children with the apparent intention of then killing herself. This type of crime, familicide or filicide suicide, represents a particularly tragic category of homicide. It often occurs when a parent is experiencing severe mental health crisis, feels trapped in an impossible situation, or operates under the delusional belief that killing their children is somehow merciful or protective. Investigators had to piece together what had led to this tragedy. What was happening in Retta Cruse's life? What circumstances had brought her to such a desperate point? Were there warning signs that had been missed? The investigation revealed that Retta Cruse had been struggling. Friends and family would later tell investigators that she had been experiencing difficulties, though the specific nature of those struggles has not been fully made public. But regardless of what challenges Retta Cruse faced, financial problems, relationship issues, mental health struggles, or anything else, there can be no justification for killing 2 innocent children who depended on her for their very survival. Once she was medically stabilized, Retta Cruse was arrested and charged with 2 counts of first-degree murder. The evidence against her was overwhelming. She had killed her daughters. There was no question about who had committed these crimes. Retta Cruse was held in custody as her case moved through the court system. She faced the possibility of spending the rest of her life in prison for what she had done. The legal proceedings in the case were relatively brief compared to some murder trials. The evidence was clear. Retta Cruse's defense team had limited options for mounting a defense when the facts of the case were so straightforward. Rather than proceed to trial, Retta Cruse made the decision to plead guilty to the murders of her 2 daughters. In 2022, she entered guilty pleas to 2 counts of first-degree murder. By pleading guilty, Retta Cruse accepted responsibility for what she had done. She acknowledged that she had deliberately killed Zariah and Zarina. There would be no trial, no attempt to claim she was not guilty by reason of insanity, no lengthy legal battle. The guilty plea meant the case would proceed directly to sentencing, where the court would determine what punishment was appropriate for someone who had committed such heinous acts. At her sentencing hearing, the court heard from family members who had loved Zariah and Zarina. The girl's father spoke. Extended family members spoke. Teachers and others who had known the children spoke. Each person painted a picture of 2 young lives full of potential, now lost forever. The prosecutor argued for the maximum sentence allowed under law. The defense, while acknowledging the horrific nature of the crimes, asked the court to consider Retta Cruse's mental state and any mitigating factors. The judge, in pronouncing sentence, emphasized the particularly vulnerable nature of the victims, young children who depended entirely on their mother. The judge noted the breach of the most fundamental trust that exists in human society, the trust a child places in a parent. Retta Cruse was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole on each count of first-degree murder. She would spend the rest of her natural life behind bars, never to know freedom again. She was transported to the Arizona State Prison System to begin serving her sentence. For Retta Cruse, this was the beginning of a life defined by concrete walls, steel bars, and the knowledge of what she had done. But Retta Cruse's story doesn't end with her sentencing. In a final, tragic chapter, Retta Cruse completed what she had attempted on the day she killed her daughters. In February of 2025, approximately 3 years after being sentenced to life in prison, Retta Cruse died by suicide while incarcerated. The exact circumstances of her death have not been publicly disclosed, but corrections officials confirmed that she took her own life in prison. Some might see this as Retta Cruse finally succeeding in what she had tried to do that terrible day in March of 2021, completing a murder-suicide. But her death doesn't undo the damage she caused. It doesn't bring back Zariah and Zarina. It doesn't heal the wounds left in the hearts of those who love those little girls. The case of Retta Cruse and her daughters raises difficult questions about suicide prevention in correctional facilities, about mental health treatment for incarcerated individuals, and about how the prison system handles inmates who have committed crimes while in the grip of mental health crises. It also raises questions about what could have been done to prevent the original tragedy. Were there intervention points that were missed? Could someone have helped Retta Cruse before she reached the point of killing her children? These are questions without easy answers. Mental health services are often inadequate, particularly for struggling parents. The stigma surrounding mental illness can prevent people from seeking help. And sometimes, tragically, people are determined to commit acts of violence regardless of what support systems might be available. In all the discussion of Retta Cruse's actions, her mental state, her trial, and her ultimate death in prison, it's essential that we not lose sight of the real victims in this case: Zariah Atwell and Zarina Cruse. These were two little girls who should be 13 and 8 years old today. Zariah would be in elementary school. Zarina would be in middle school, navigating the challenges of adolescence, making friends, discovering her interests and talents. Instead, their lives were cut short before they truly began. They never got the chance to grow up, to fall in love, to pursue careers, to have families of their own. All of that potential was stolen from them by their mother. There are people who will mourn these girls for the rest of their lives. Grandparents who will never see them graduate. Aunts and uncles who will never dance at their weddings. A father who will never walk them down the aisle or meet his grandchildren. The ripples of Retta Cruse's actions will continue for decades, affecting family members and loved ones who must live with this loss. With Retta Cruse's death in February 2025, the case is closed in a legal sense. There will be no appeals, no further court proceedings, no possibility of overturning convictions or sentences. Retta Cruse took her own life in prison, just as she had taken the lives of her two innocent daughters. In a strange and tragic way, she received the death penalty after all, self-imposed, years after her crimes. But the case lives on in the memories of those affected by it. It lives on in the court records that document what happened. It lives on as a cautionary tale about the devastating intersection of mental illness, family crisis, and violence against children. The case of Retta Cruse stands as a reminder that maternal filicide, while statistically rare, is a very real phenomenon that claims young lives every year. It's a reminder that we need better mental health support for struggling parents, better intervention systems, and better ways to identify families in crisis before tragedy strikes. Most of all, it's a reminder to cherish the children in our lives, to protect them, and to never take for granted the precious gift of their presence in our world. This tragic case reminds us why we do this work at Cold Case Time. If you appreciate our thorough coverage of these difficult cases, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to our channel. Let's keep these victims' memories alive together. Case 3. Inoue, the Tempe meet Cleaver murders. May 10, 2021. Tempe, Arizona. A quiet residential neighborhood. Inside one home, a scene of unimaginable violence was about to unfold, one that would leave 2 children dead and a community searching for answers. This is the case of Inoue, a 40-year-old mother who, on that spring morning, would take the lives of her 7-year-old and 9-year-old children in one of the most violent acts of maternal filicide in Arizona history. The weapon she chose? A meat cleaver. The victims? Her own son and daughter, 2 elementary school children who should have been safe in their own home. Inoue had moved to the United States from Japan. She was married and had 2 children, a 9-year-old son and a 7-year-old daughter. From the outside, they appeared to be a normal family living in a Tempe apartment complex. But inside that home, tensions were building. The marriage between Inoue and her husband was troubled. There had been arguments, conflicts, and ongoing disputes that had created a volatile atmosphere in the household. On the morning of May 10th, those tensions would explode into horrific violence. But it wouldn't be the husband who bore the brunt of that violence. It would be the children. The exact sequence of events that morning has been pieced together through police investigation, forensic evidence, and statements from those involved. What emerged is a picture of calculated, deliberate violence against two defenseless children. Inoue armed herself with a meat cleaver, a large, heavy kitchen knife designed for cutting through bone and tough meat. It is a brutal weapon, and what she would do with it was even more brutal. In an attack that can only be described as savage, Inoue used the meat cleaver to kill both of her children. The 9-year-old boy and 7-year-old girl suffered devastating injuries. The medical examiner would later confirm they died from multiple sharp force trauma wounds, injuries inflicted by their own mother. The children's father was present in the home during the attack. Exactly what he witnessed and what occurred in those terrible moments is part of the case record. But what's clear is that he was unable to prevent the murders of his children. When police arrived at the scene after receiving emergency calls, they found a scene of carnage. 2 children dead, blood throughout the residence, and Inoue, the perpetrator of these unspeakable acts, still at the scene. Tempe Police Department officers and detectives responded to what was clearly a double homicide. The victims were children. The suspect was their mother. And the level of violence was extreme even by the standards of homicide investigators who had seen many terrible things in their careers. The investigation revealed several crucial facts. First, this was not a case of accidental death or momentary loss of control. The severity and number of wounds inflicted on both children indicated sustained, intentional violence. This was murder in every sense of the word. Second, there had been previous police contact with the family. Officers had been called to the residence before in response to domestic disturbances. This wasn't a family completely unknown to law enforcement. There had been warning signs of trouble in the household. The question investigators had to answer was why. What had driven Inoue to commit such extreme violence against her own children? Was this an act of revenge against her husband? Was it a mental health crisis? Was it a culturally specific form of family annihilation? In examining cases of maternal filicide, particularly those involving parents from different cultural backgrounds, it's important to approach the analysis with cultural sensitivity while also being clear that no culture condones child murder. In Japan, there is a term oyako shinju, which refers to parent-child suicide, a phenomenon where parents kill their children before attempting to kill themselves, often during times of extreme shame, financial crisis, or family breakdown. However, this cultural context in no way excuses or justifies Inoue's actions. What Inoue did was not oyako shinju. She killed her children, but did not successfully kill herself. And regardless of any cultural factors, she was committing a crime under Arizona law and violating the fundamental human principle that parents protect their children, not harm them. Inoue was arrested at the scene and taken into custody. She was transported to the hospital for evaluation and treatment of any injuries, then formally booked into jail on 2 counts of first-degree murder. The evidence against her was overwhelming. The murder weapon was recovered. The crime scene told a clear story. Witnesses and forensic evidence all pointed to Inoue as the person who had brutally killed these 2 children. There was no question about her guilt in terms of whether she had committed the physical acts. The question would be about her mental state at the time and whether she could be held criminally responsible. As in many cases involving extreme violence by a parent against their own children, the court ordered psychiatric evaluations of Inoue. Was she suffering from a mental illness? Was she competent to stand trial? Did she understand right from wrong at the time of the murders? Mental health experts examined Inoue extensively. The results of those evaluations have not been fully made public, but ultimately the court determined that she was competent to stand trial and could be held criminally responsible for her actions. Being mentally ill, even severely mentally ill, does not automatically mean someone can't be prosecuted for murder. The legal standard in Arizona, as in most jurisdictions, is whether the person knew right from wrong at the time of the crime. The court found that Inoue met the standard for criminal responsibility. She would face trial for the murders of her 2 children. Inoue's case proceeded to trial. The prosecution presented evidence of the brutal murders, crime scene photos, forensic evidence, the murder weapon, testimony from first responders and investigators. The defense strategy focused on Inoue's mental state. Her attorneys argued that she had been experiencing severe psychological distress at the time of the killings. They presented expert testimony about her mental health and the circumstances leading up to the murders. But the prosecution countered that regardless of any mental health issues, Inoue had committed premeditated, intentional murder. She had armed herself with a weapon. She had attacked her children with that weapon multiple times. She had inflicted fatal injuries on both children. This was first-degree murder. The jury heard all the evidence. They saw the crime scene photos. They heard the expert testimony. They learned about the lives of the two children who had died. And they had to make a decision about what punishment was appropriate. After deliberation, the jury returned guilty verdicts on both counts of first-degree murder. Inoue was convicted of murdering her 9-year-old son and 7-year-old daughter. The verdict meant that Inoue would face serious prison time, potentially the rest of her life behind bars. In Arizona, first-degree murder carries a sentence of either life in prison or natural life without the possibility of parole. The case then moved to the sentencing phase, where the court would determine exactly how long Inoue would spend in prison. The sentencing hearing for Inoue took place in May of 2025, approximately 4 years after she had murdered her children. The delay between conviction and sentencing is not unusual in complex murder cases involving extensive psychological evaluation and legal proceedings. At the sentencing hearing, the court heard victim impact statements from family members. The children's father spoke about the loss of his son and daughter. Other family members described the pain of losing these young lives. Teachers who had known the children spoke about the bright, curious students they remembered. The prosecutor asked the court to impose the maximum sentence allowed under law. This was not a case deserving of mercy or leniency. This was a case of brutal, intentional murder of 2 defenseless children by their own mother. The defense asked for some degree of mercy, pointing to Inoue's mental health struggles and the circumstances that had led to the tragedy. But there was no arguing with the fundamental facts. She had killed 2 children with a meat cleaver. The judge, in pronouncing sentence, noted the extreme violence of the crimes, the vulnerability of the victims, and the need to protect society. The judge also noted that 2 sentences would run consecutively, meaning one after the other, not at the same time. Inoue was sentenced to 2 consecutive natural life sentences without the possibility of parole, plus 35 additional years. This sentence ensures that Inoue will die in prison. There is no possibility of parole, no possibility of early release, no possibility of ever walking free again. The case of Inoue and her 2 murdered children left the Tempe community reeling. Parents held their children closer. People questioned whether more could have been done to prevent this tragedy. There were reports that police had been called to the residence before for domestic disturbances. Could law enforcement have intervened more effectively? Should Child Protective Services have been more involved with the family? These are difficult questions with no easy answers. Domestic violence is a complex issue. Mental health crises can escalate quickly, and sometimes, tragically, warning signs are missed or not recognized for what they are until it's too late. The children's father was left to mourn the loss of his son and daughter and to grapple with the impossible question of how the woman he had married, the mother of his children, could have done something so horrific. The school community where the children had been students held memorials. Classmates who had played with these children struggled to understand why their friends weren't coming back to school. Today, Inoue is incarcerated in the Arizona Department of Corrections, Rehabilitation, and Reentry. She is 44 years old. She will remain in prison for the rest of her natural life. She will never attend another Mother's Day celebration, never experience another holiday with family, never hold a grandchild or celebrate a birthday or know anything beyond the walls of prison. And somewhere in Arizona, there are 2 graves marking the final resting places of a 9-year-old boy and a 7-year-old girl who should be teenagers right now. They should be in middle school and high school, discovering their interests, making friends, planning their futures. Instead, their lives were cut brutally short by the one person who was supposed to protect them above all others, their mother. The Inoue case highlights several important issues in the field of family violence and child protection. First, it demonstrates that domestic violence doesn't always just affect adult partners. Children in homes where there is domestic conflict are at elevated risk for harm, even if the violence hasn't previously been directed at them. Second, it shows the importance of law enforcement and social services taking domestic disturbance calls seriously and following up appropriately. While we can't know for certain if intervention would have prevented this tragedy, every contact with a troubled family is an opportunity to assess risk and potentially provide assistance. Third, it reminds us that mental health support needs to be accessible and effective, particularly for parents experiencing crisis. Many cases of filicide occur when a parent is in the grip of severe mental illness or extreme stress, and better mental health systems might prevent some of these tragedies. Finally, it underscores the need for community awareness. Neighbors, friends, family members, teachers, all of these people may be in a position to notice warning signs and report concerns to appropriate authorities. In the media coverage and legal proceedings of this case, the focus was often on Inoue, her mental state, her motives, her trial and sentencing. But the real focus should be on the two children who lost their lives. A 9-year-old boy who loved school, who had friends, who had his whole life ahead of him. A 7-year-old girl who was just beginning to discover the world, full of curiosity and potential. These children mattered. Their lives had value. They were loved by their father, their extended family, their teachers and classmates. They deserved to grow up, to experience all the joys and challenges of life, to become whoever they were meant to be. Instead, that potential was destroyed in an act of horrific violence. And while Inoue will spend the rest of her life in prison paying for what she did, no punishment can undo the harm or bring back these innocent lives. The case of Inoue stands as one of the most violent examples of maternal filicide in Arizona history. A stark reminder that sometimes the greatest danger to a child comes from within their own home, from the very person who gave them life. If you want to see more detailed coverage of cases like this, make sure to like this video and subscribe to Cold Case Time. We're committed to telling these stories with the depth and respect they deserve. Case 4. Connie Villa, Murder and Attempted Family Annihilation. Casa Grande, Arizona. May 30th, 2013. A day that should have been ordinary turned into a nightmare of murder, attempted murder, and family destruction that would shock even seasoned investigators. This is the case of Connie Villa, a 44-year-old mother who, in a series of calculated and cold-blooded acts, killed her 13-year-old daughter, attempted to poison her 3 other children, and tried to murder her ex-husband. The crimes Connie Villa committed weren't acts of sudden rage or momentary insanity. They were planned, deliberate, and carried out over time, making them all the more chilling. Connie Villa was a mother of 4 children living in Casa Grande, Arizona, a city located between Phoenix and Tucson. She had been through a divorce and shared custody of her children with her ex-husband. From the outside, Connie Villa appeared to be a typical divorced mother trying to navigate co-parenting and raise her children. But beneath that exterior, something dark was brewing, something that would eventually explode into violence that would destroy her family. The relationship between Connie Villa and her ex-husband was contentious. There were ongoing disputes about custody, finances, and the children. But no one could have predicted that these domestic conflicts would escalate to murder and attempted murder. At the center of this case is 13-year-old Annihilation Macias. She was Connie Villa's daughter, a teenager in middle school with her whole life ahead of her. She had siblings who loved her, a father who cared for her, friends at school, dreams for her future. Annihilation didn't know that her own mother was planning to kill her. She didn't know that the person who was supposed to protect her and nurture her was instead plotting her death. And Annihilation wasn't the only target. Connie Villa had 3 other children, and she attempted to poison all 3 of them as well. Fortunately, those 3 children survived, but they were victimized by their own mother nonetheless. Connie Villa's ex-husband was also a target. She wanted him dead, and she would attempt to kill him as well. The details of how Connie Villa killed her 13-year-old daughter are disturbing and heartbreaking. On May 30th, 2013, Connie Villa ended Annihilation's life. The exact method has not been fully disclosed in public records, but what is clear is that this was an intentional, premeditated act of murder. Annihilation died at her mother's hands. The girl who should have been able to trust her mother above all others was betrayed in the most fundamental way possible. After killing Annihilation, Connie Villa had to conceal what she had done. She had to explain the girl's absence. She had to avoid suspicion while she continued with the rest of her horrific plan. But Connie Villa's plans didn't stop with murdering one daughter. She wanted to kill her other 3 children as well. Connie Villa attempted to poison her 3 surviving children. The exact poison or substance used has not been publicly detailed, but investigators would later determine that she had deliberately tried to kill these children by giving them toxic substances. Fortunately, the poisoning attempts were not successful. The 3 children became ill but survived. Their survival likely saved them from the same fate as their sister Inoue. But imagine the horror of those children realizing that their own mother had tried to kill them. Imagine the psychological trauma of knowing that the person who gave you life had attempted to take it away. Connie Villa's rampage extended beyond her children. She also attacked her ex-husband in an attempt to kill him. The details of this attack indicate a level of planning and premeditation. This wasn't a spontaneous act of violence during a heated argument. This was a calculated attempt at murder. Like the 3 children she had tried to poison, Connie Villa's ex-husband survived her attack. But he had come terrifyingly close to being another victim of this woman's violent plans. When authorities began investigating the death of 13-year-old Inoue Macias and the suspicious illnesses affecting her siblings, the evidence began pointing in a direction that was almost too horrible to believe. Their own mother was responsible. Casa Grande Police Department detectives, working with the Pinal County Attorney's Office, built a case that showed Connie Villa had murdered 1 child, attempted to murder 3 others, and attempted to murder her ex-husband. The investigation revealed a pattern of behavior that indicated premeditation. Connie Villa had obtained the means to poison her children. She had planned how to carry out these attacks. She had attempted to cover up her crimes. Investigators also had to determine motive. Why would a mother want to kill her own children and her ex-husband? Was this an act of revenge against the ex-husband, with the children as collateral damage? Was it a twisted form of family annihilation? Was there a financial motive? The evidence showed that Connie Villa's crimes were connected to the ongoing conflicts with her ex-husband. But regardless of what domestic disputes existed, there is no justification for murdering children or attempting to kill family members. Connie Villa was arrested and charged with an extensive list of crimes. Bullet operator first-degree murder for the death of Inoue Macias. Bullet operator 3 counts of attempted first-degree murder for trying to kill her other 3 children. Bullet operator attempted first-degree murder for the attack on her ex-husband. Bullet operator multiple counts of child abuse. Bullet operator other related charges. The charges reflected the full scope of Connie Villa's criminal conduct. This wasn't just one crime. It was a series of violent acts directed at her own family members. If convicted on all charges, Connie Villa faced the possibility of spending the rest of her life in prison, with potentially hundreds of years in sentences stacked consecutively. The case against Connie Villa moved through the court system. The evidence was extensive: forensic evidence, testimony from the surviving victims, medical evidence showing the effects of the poisoning attempts, and evidence relating to the murder of Inoue. The prosecution had to prove not just that Connie Villa had committed these acts, but that she had done so with premeditation and intent to kill. For a first-degree murder conviction, they needed to show this wasn't an accident or a crime of passion, but a calculated act. The defense faced an uphill battle. The evidence against Connie Villa was strong. Multiple victims testified against her. The forensic evidence supported the prosecution's theory of the crimes. Connie Villa's defense team had to decide whether to take the case to trial or negotiate a plea agreement. Taking the case to trial meant potentially facing even harsher sentences if convicted. But pleading guilty meant accepting responsibility and giving up the right to appeal. The case ultimately resulted in convictions on multiple counts. While specific trial details are not fully public, court records confirm that Connie Villa was convicted of murdering her daughter and attempting to murder her other children and ex-husband. The sentencing phase would determine exactly how much time Connie Villa would spend in prison for her crimes. In 2017, for years after she had murdered her daughter and attempted to kill her other family members, Connie Villa stood before a judge for sentencing. The courtroom heard victim impact statements from those who had survived her attacks. Her ex-husband spoke about the trauma of being attacked by the mother of his children. Her surviving children, now older and dealing with the aftermath of both their sister's murder and their own mother's attempts to kill them, had to confront the woman who had betrayed them so fundamentally. Friends and family members of Annihilation spoke about the young girl whose life had been stolen. They described a bright, loving teenager who had deserved to grow up, to go to high school, to experience all the milestones of life that were taken from her. The prosecutor argued for the maximum sentence allowed under law. Connie Villa had murdered a child, her own child. She had attempted to murder 3 more children and her ex-husband. She had shown a pattern of violence and a complete disregard for human life, including the lives of her own offspring. The defense asked for some degree of mercy, though there was little they could argue given the severity and scope of the crimes. The judge, in pronouncing sentence, noted the particular heinousness of these crimes. Murdering one's own child is among the most serious violations of the bonds of family and trust. Attempting to murder 3 more children compounds that violation, and attacking the children's father adds yet another layer of violence. Connie Villa was sentenced to natural life in prison without the possibility of parole for the murder of Annihilation. Additionally, she received over 155 years for the attempted murders and other charges. The sentences ensure that Connie Villa will never walk free again. She will die in prison decades from now, while Annihilation will remain forever 13 years old. The 3 children who survived Connie Villa's poisoning attempts were left to grapple with an impossible reality. Their mother had tried to kill them, and she had succeeded in killing their sister. These children lost not just their sister, but also their mother, though the loss of their mother came in the worst possible way. She wasn't taken from them by death or distance, but by her own criminal acts. They had to process the trauma of being poisoned by their own mother. They had to deal with the grief of losing their sister. They had to testify in court about what happened to them, and they had to find a way to move forward with their lives despite all of this. Their father, Connie Villa's ex-husband, was left to raise these traumatized children alone while dealing with his own trauma from being attacked and from losing his daughter. The ripple effects of Connie Villa's crimes will continue for the rest of these family members' lives. Birthdays and holidays will always be marked by Annihilation's absence. Major life events will be bittersweet, knowing she should be there to celebrate them too. Connie Villa is currently incarcerated in the Arizona Department of Corrections. She is 55 years old. She has been in prison for over 10 years now and will remain there for the rest of her life. She will never attend another family gathering, never celebrate another holiday outside of prison walls, never know freedom again. The prison is her world now, and it will be until she dies. Meanwhile, in Casa Grande, there is a grave marking the final resting place of Annihilation. She would be 24 years old now. She should be a college graduate, perhaps starting a career, maybe getting married, thinking about having children of her own. Instead, her life ended at age 13 at the hands of her own mother. And 3 other children had to grow up knowing their mother tried to kill them too. The Connie Villa case illustrates several important points about family violence and child protection. First, it shows that family annihilation, the attempt to kill one's entire family, can occur not just in cases involving fathers, but also mothers. While maternal filicide is less common than paternal filicide in cases involving multiple victims, it does occur. Second, it demonstrates that domestic conflicts between ex-spouses can escalate to violence that impacts the children. While most divorced parents manage to co-parent without violence, cases like this one show the importance of monitoring high-conflict custody situations. Third, it highlights the need for awareness among teachers, doctors, and others who interact with children. If a child is being slowly poisoned or abused, there may be signs that alert adults can notice and report. Finally, it reminds us that premeditated violence against children, particularly when carried out over time, deserves the most serious punishment our legal system can impose. In the years since her death, friends and family have worked to keep Annihilation's memory alive. They've shared photos of her smiling face. They've talked about her personality, her interests, her dreams. Annihilation was more than just a victim in a true crime case. She was a real person with a real life that mattered. She had hopes and fears, likes and dislikes, strengths and weaknesses like any 13-year-old girl. She loved her family, including, presumably, the mother who would ultimately kill her. She probably never imagined that her own mother was capable of such violence. Inoue deserved to grow up. She deserved to go to her high school prom, to graduate, to go to college or pursue a career, to fall in love, to have children of her own someday if she chose. All of that was stolen from her. The case of Connie Villa stands as a horrifying example of how domestic conflicts can escalate to family annihilation, and how even mothers, who we often think of as natural protectors of children, can become the greatest threat to their own offspring. Connie Villa will spend the rest of her life paying for what she did. But no amount of prison time can bring back Inoue or undo the trauma inflicted on the 3 children who survived. Help us continue covering these important cases by liking this video and subscribing to Cold Case Time. Your engagement helps ensure these victims are never forgotten. Case 5. Vallow Daybell, the Doomsday Mom murders. This case captured national attention like few others. It involves a mother whose bizarre religious beliefs, twisted manipulation, and shocking violence resulted in the deaths of her own children and became one of the most sensational murder cases in recent American history. This is the case of Vallow Daybell, known in the media as the Doomsday Mom, a woman whose journey from seemingly normal mother to convicted child killer involved cult-like religious extremism, multiple suspicious deaths, and a conspiracy that spanned multiple states. While much of the criminal conduct occurred in Idaho, Vallow Daybell also faced charges in Arizona that would result in additional life sentences, ensuring she would never see freedom again. Vallow was born Lori Noreen Cox in 1973 in California. She grew up in a religious household and was raised in the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, commonly known as the Mormon Church. Lori was married multiple times throughout her life. She had children from different marriages, including a son named Colby and a daughter named Tylee Ryan. She also adopted her brother's son, Joshua J.J. Vallow, after he was born. For years, Lori appeared to be a devoted mother. She posted photos of her children on social media. She was active in their lives. To those who knew her casually, she seemed like a typical mom. But beneath that facade, something was changing. Lori became involved with extreme religious beliefs that diverged from mainstream Mormon doctrine. She began associating with people who held fringe views about the end times, spiritual warfare, and the battle between good and evil. The trajectory of Lori's life changed dramatically when she met Chad Daybell, a self-published author who wrote books about near-death experiences and doomsday prophecies. Chad Daybell was married with 5 children, but he and Lori began a relationship that would become a toxic partnership, fueling each other's extreme beliefs and ultimately leading to multiple deaths. Chad and Lori developed a shared belief system that included ideas about people being dark or light spirits, about zombies possessing human bodies, and about their own special roles in preparing for the end times and the second coming of Jesus Christ. These beliefs, while deeply concerning from a psychological standpoint, might have remained merely odd personal convictions if they hadn't been used to justify violence and murder. As Lori and Chad's relationship intensified, people around them began dying under suspicious circumstances. In July of 2019, Lori's estranged husband Charles Vallow was shot and killed in Chandler, Arizona. The shooting was carried out by Lori's brother, Alex Cox, who claimed it was self-defense. At the time, authorities investigated and initially accepted the self-defense claim, though the death would later be re-examined in light of subsequent events. In October of 2019, Chad Daybell's wife Tammy Daybell died suddenly at their home in Idaho. Initially, her death was attributed to natural causes, and she was quickly buried without an autopsy. But this death, too, would later come under scrutiny. And then, in the fall of 2019, Lori's 2 youngest children, 16-year-old Tylee Ryan and 7-year-old Joshua J.J. Vallow, disappeared. Family members became concerned when they couldn't reach Tylee or J.J. When they asked Lori about the children, she gave various excuses and evasive answers. In November of 2019, police in Idaho conducted a welfare check, asking to see J.J. Lori claimed he was with a friend in Arizona. When police followed up with the friend, they discovered this was a lie. By the time police returned to question Lori further, she and Chad had fled Idaho and were located in Hawaii, living a carefree life while Lori's children remained missing. The case garnered national media attention. Where were Tylee and JJ? Were they alive? Had they been harmed? The public desperately wanted answers, and law enforcement was working tirelessly to find them. In June of 2020, 9 months after the children were last seen, investigators executed a search warrant at Chad Daybell's property in rural Idaho. What they found was every parent's worst nightmare and confirmed the fears that many had held. The bodies of Tylee Ryan and J.J. Vallow were buried on Chad's property. Tylee's remains had been burned and dismembered. J.J.'s body was found wrapped in plastic and duct tape. Both children had been dead for months while their mother and Chad Daybell had been living their lives, getting married, and traveling to Hawaii. The discovery of the children's bodies transformed the case from a missing persons investigation to a double murder investigation. Lori Vallow and Chad Daybell were now facing charges for killing these two innocent children. While the murders of Tylee and J.J. occurred in Idaho, Lori Vallow Daybell's criminal conduct extended to Arizona as well. Remember the death of Charles Vallow, Lori's husband who was shot by her brother Alex Cox in Chandler, Arizona? As investigators looked more closely at that death in light of the children's murders, they determined it wasn't self-defense at all. It was murder, a conspiracy involving Lori and her brother to eliminate Charles so that Lori could be with Chad, and so she could obtain life insurance money. Additionally, there was an attempted murder in Arizona. In October of 2019, there was an attempt on the life of Brandon Boudreaux, the ex-husband of Lori's niece. Someone shot at Brandon's vehicle in what investigators believe was a failed murder attempt connected to Lori and Chad's conspiracy to eliminate anyone who stood in the way of their relationship and beliefs. These Arizona crimes would result in separate charges being filed against Lori Vallow Daybell in Maricopa County. In 2023, Lori Vallow Daybell stood trial in Idaho for the murders of her two children, Tylee and J.J., as well as for the murder of Tammy Daybell, Chad's first wife. The trial presented overwhelming evidence of Lori's guilt. Cell phone records, text messages, financial records, witness testimony, and forensic evidence all painted a picture of a woman who had conspired with Chad Daybell to murder anyone who stood between them and their desired life together. The prosecution argued that Lori and Chad had labeled people as dark or zombies to justify killing them. Tylee, J.J., Charles Vallow, and Tammy Daybell had all been designated as dark before their deaths. The defense tried to argue that Lori was under Chad's influence and manipulation, that she didn't actually participate in the murders. But the evidence showed she was an active participant in the conspiracy, that she had helped plan and cover up the murders, and that she had lied repeatedly to police and family members about the children's whereabouts. In May of 2023, the jury found Lori Vallow Daybell guilty on all counts. 2 counts of first-degree murder for killing Tylee and J.J., and 1 count of first-degree murder for the killing of Tammy Daybell, along with conspiracy charges. She was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole on multiple counts, meaning she would never walk free again. But Idaho wasn't finished with Lori Vallow Daybell. Arizona also had charges pending against her. In Arizona, Lori was charged with conspiracy to commit murder in the death of Charles Vallow and in the attempted murder of Brandon Boudreaux. Even though Lori's brother Alex Cox, who had actually pulled the trigger to kill Charles and who is believed to have been the shooter in Brandon's case, died in December of 2019 from what was ruled natural causes. Though many suspect he may have been another murder victim, Lori could still be charged with conspiracy. The evidence showed that Lori had participated in planning Charles's death. She had financial motives, relationship motives, and had communicated with Alex about Charles before the shooting. This wasn't a case of Alex acting alone. This was a conspiracy. In February of 2024, Lori Vallow Daybell pleaded guilty in Arizona to conspiracy to commit murder charges related to Charles Vallow's death and the attempt on Brandon Boudreaux's life. By pleading guilty, she avoided a trial in Arizona, but she also accepted responsibility for participating in these crimes. In July of 2025, just a few months ago, Lori Vallow Daybell was sentenced in Arizona. She received additional life sentences that will run consecutively to her Idaho sentences. This means that even if, hypothetically, her Idaho convictions were somehow overturned on appeal, which is extraordinarily unlikely, she would still spend the rest of her life in prison based on the Arizona convictions alone. Let's step back and look at the full scope of Lori Vallow Daybell's criminal conduct. Bullet operator 2 of her own children murdered, Tylee Ryan, age 16, and J.J. Vallow, age 7. Bullet operator, her husband Charles Vallow murdered in Arizona. Bullet operator, her lover's wife Tammy Daybell murdered in Idaho. Bullet operator, an attempted murder of Brandon Boudreaux in Arizona. Bullet operator, her brother Alex Cox, who participated in the conspiracy, dead under suspicious circumstances. Bullet operator, potential involvement in other suspicious deaths in her past, including a previous husband who died unexpectedly. The body count connected to Lori Vallow Daybell is staggering. Multiple people died, and in each case, their deaths somehow benefited Lori, whether financially, romantically, or by removing obstacles to her relationship with Chad Daybell. One of the most disturbing aspects of this case is how Lori and Chad used religious beliefs to justify murder. They created their own fringe belief system that allowed them to label people as dark or possessed by zombies. Once someone was labeled this way, they believed it was acceptable, even necessary, to kill that person to free their spirit or to protect others. Tylee and JJ, Lori's own children, were labeled as dark. This designation sealed their fate. In Lori and Chad's twisted worldview, killing these children wasn't murder, it was spiritual warfare. This case highlights the dangers of religious extremism and cult-like thinking. When people become convinced that they have special knowledge or a special mission from God, and when they surround themselves only with others who reinforce these beliefs, they can become capable of horrific acts that they justify as righteous. It's important to note that Lori and Chad's beliefs were not representative of mainstream Mormonism or any established religious tradition. They had created their own fringe ideology that borrowed elements from various sources and twisted them into something dangerous. Experts who have analyzed this case have noted several concerning psychological factors. Lori Vallow Daybell displayed signs of narcissism. She believed she was a special, chosen individual with a unique role to play in cosmic events. She showed a lack of empathy for her victims, including her own children. She was manipulative, lying repeatedly to family, friends, and authorities. Some have speculated about possible psychosis or delusional thinking. Did Lori genuinely believe the extreme religious ideas she espoused? Or did she use them as a convenient justification for murders she committed for more prosaic reasons like money, romance, and removing obstacles? The truth likely involves elements of both. Lori may have experienced some level of genuine belief in her own special status and mission, but she also clearly understood right from wrong, as evidenced by her extensive efforts to conceal her crimes and lie about the children's whereabouts. The victims in this case left behind grieving family members who have had to process unimaginable loss. Tylee Ryan's father had died years earlier, but she had extended family who loved her. J.J. Vallow's grandparents, Larry and Kay Woodcock, fought tirelessly to find him when he went missing and have been vocal advocates for justice. Charles Vallow's family lost a son, brother, and father to violence. Tammy Daybell's children lost their mother and had to grapple with the fact that their own father had conspired to kill her. These family members have had to endure media scrutiny, lengthy trials, and the ongoing pain of knowing their loved ones were murdered by people who were supposed to care for them. Chad Daybell, Lori's co-conspirator and husband, was tried separately in Idaho. In 2024, he was convicted of the same murders as Lori, the deaths of Tylee, JJ, and Tammy. Unlike Lori, Chad was sentenced to death. He currently sits on death row in Idaho, though appeals in death penalty cases typically take many years and execution may never actually occur. The fact that Chad received the death penalty while Lori received life in prison has been attributed to several factors, including that prosecutors believe Chad was the more dominant partner in the conspiracy and that Lori's defense was able to present some mitigation evidence. Regardless, both Lori and Chad will die in prison, never having shown genuine remorse for the innocent lives they took. Lori Vallow Daybell is currently incarcerated in Idaho, serving her life sentences. She is 51 years old. She has been in custody since early 2020, and she will remain in custody for the rest of her life. She will never celebrate another birthday outside of prison, never attend another religious service in a church, never travel, go to a restaurant, walk on a beach, or do any of the thousands of things free people take for granted. More importantly, she will never hold her children again. Tylee and JJ are gone forever, buried in graves that Lori visits only in whatever dreams or nightmares she may have in her prison cell. The Vallow Daybell case has become one of the most infamous crimes of the 21st century. It has been the subject of numerous documentaries, podcasts, books, and endless media coverage. The case has raised important questions about bullet operator, how to identify and intervene in cases of religious extremism before violence occurs. Bullet operator, the importance of taking missing children cases seriously and acting quickly. Bullet operator, the dangers of cult-like thinking and isolation from mainstream society. Bullet operator, how seemingly normal people can be drawn into destructive belief systems. Bullet operator, the need for mental health intervention when people begin exhibiting signs of delusional thinking. The case has also highlighted the importance of persistent investigation. If not for the dedication of law enforcement in Idaho and Arizona, if not for the persistence of JJ's grandparents who refused to stop asking questions, Lori and Chad might have gotten away with their crimes. Tylee Ryan was 16 years old when she was murdered. She was a bright, creative young woman who loved photography and had a close relationship with her little brother JJ. She should be 21 years old now, perhaps in college or starting a career. Joshua JJ Vallow was 7 years old when he was murdered. He had special needs and required extra care and attention, which his mother was supposed to provide. He was a happy child who loved life. He should be 12 years old now, in middle school, growing and learning and experiencing life. Charles Vallow was a successful businessman and devoted father figure to JJ. He recognized that something was wrong with Lori and was trying to protect the children when he was murdered. Tammy Daybell was a beloved mother, teacher, and librarian. She was murdered so that her husband could be with another woman. Brandon Boudreaux survived the attempt on his life, but he has to live with the knowledge that his ex-wife's aunt wanted him dead and nearly succeeded. These are the real victims of Lori Vallow Daybell's crimes. While the sensational aspects of the case, the doomsday beliefs, the multiple deaths, the bizarre claims, have captured public attention, we must never forget that real people died and real families were destroyed by Lori's actions. The case of Lori Vallow Daybell is unique in many ways. The combination of religious extremism, multiple murders across state lines, the involvement of children, and the defendant's complete lack of remorse makes it stand out even in the annals of true crime. But in one important way, it's similar to all the other cases in this documentary. It involves a mother who betrayed the most fundamental duty of parenthood, to protect and nurture one's children. Lori Vallow Daybell chose her relationship with Chad Daybell, chose her extreme beliefs, chose money and freedom over the lives of her own children. And now she will spend the rest of her life paying for those choices. The case serves as a chilling reminder that evil can wear a friendly face, that danger to children can come from those closest to them, and that we must always be vigilant in protecting the vulnerable among us. This case shocked the nation and continues to raise important questions. If you found this coverage valuable, please like this video and subscribe to Cold Case Time for more comprehensive true crime analysis. Case 6. Jerice Hunter. The disappearance and murder of Jesse Shockley. Glendale, Arizona. October 11, 2011. A 5-year-old girl named Jesse Shockley was reported missing from her home. Her mother, Jerice Hunter, claimed the child had disappeared while playing outside. What followed was a massive search effort, national media attention, and eventually, a murder conviction, even though Jesse's body was never found. This is the tragic case of Jerice Hunter, a mother whose abuse of her daughter escalated to murder, and who then tried to cover up her crime with lies about a disappearance that never actually happened. Jesse Shockley was a beautiful 5-year-old girl with a bright smile. She should have been in kindergarten, learning to read, making friends, experiencing all the joys of childhood. Instead, Jessie lived in a home where she was abused, neglected, and ultimately killed by her own mother. Jessie was one of 5 children being raised by Jerice Hunter. While Jerice's treatment of her other children was far from perfect, her abuse was particularly focused on Jessie. The little girl was subjected to horrific treatment. She was beaten. She was starved. She was confined to a closet as punishment. She suffered in silence, unable to escape or to effectively seek help. And on a day in the fall of 2011, Jerice Hunter's abuse of Jessie went too far, and the child died. On October 11, 2011, Jerice Hunter reported to police that her 5-year-old daughter Jessie was missing. She claimed that Jessie had been playing outside their apartment complex and had vanished. Glendale Police Department immediately launched a missing child investigation. Officers flooded the area. Search teams combed the neighborhood. The community rallied, with volunteers distributing flyers and searching for any sign of Jessie. The case received significant media coverage. Jessie's photo was broadcast on news stations across Arizona and eventually nationwide. People desperately wanted to find this missing little girl and bring her home safely. But investigators quickly began to notice inconsistencies in Jerice Hunter's story. Her account of what happened kept changing. Her behavior seemed off for a mother whose child was missing, and the timeline she provided didn't match up with other evidence. As detectives dug deeper, they uncovered disturbing information about Jessie's life before her disappearance. Jerice Hunter had a history with Child Protective Services. There had been previous reports of abuse and neglect in the home. In fact, Jessie and her siblings had actually been removed from Jerice care at one point, but they had been returned, a decision that would prove tragic. Neighbors and others who had seen Jessie reported that the child appeared malnourished and scared. Some had noticed bruises. There were signs that something was seriously wrong in that household, but no intervention had occurred that was sufficient to save Jessie's life. Investigators interviewed Jessie's siblings. What those children revealed was heartbreaking. They described how Jerice had abused Jessie, beating her and confining her to a closet. They described how Jessie had been kept separate from the other children and deprived of food. And they described how Jessie had died, not from disappearing while playing outside, but from injuries inflicted by their mother inside their home. Even as detectives built their case that Jessie had been murdered by her mother, they still needed to find the child's body. Jerice Hunter was not cooperating with investigators. She maintained her story about Jessie disappearing outside. She refused to admit what had really happened to her daughter. Investigators believed that Jerice had disposed of Jessie's body, likely by placing it in a dumpster where it would be taken to a landfill. If this was what happened, recovering the body would be nearly impossible. Landfills contain thousands of tons of trash, and a small child's remains could be anywhere within that mass. Despite this, investigators conducted searches of local landfills. Volunteers and law enforcement personnel spent countless hours sifting through garbage, hoping to find Jessie and give her a proper burial. Tragically, Jessie's body was never recovered. To this day, her remains have not been found. The fact that Jessie's body was never found created a challenge for prosecutors. While it is possible to prosecute a murder case without a body, it's more difficult to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that a murder occurred. However, the evidence in this case was strong enough to proceed. The testimony from Jessie's siblings about what they had witnessed, the evidence of severe abuse, the inconsistencies and lies in Jerice Hunter's statements, the fact that Jessie had simply vanished and was not found despite extensive searches. All of this evidence, taken together, pointed to one conclusion. Jessie Shockley had been killed by her mother, Jerice Hunter. Jerice Hunter was arrested and charged with bullet operator first-degree murder, bullet operator child abuse, bullet operator kidnapping for confining Jessie to the closet, bullet operator other related charges. The first-degree murder charge was based on the theory that Jerice had killed Jessie through severe abuse and had done so with premeditation or during the commission of another felony, child abuse. If convicted, Jerice Hunter faced the possibility of life in prison. The trial of Jerice Hunter took place in 2015, nearly 4 years after Jessie's death. The delay was due to the complexity of the case and the extensive investigation required. The prosecution presented a powerful case. They called Jessie's siblings to testify about what they had witnessed. These children, now older, had to relive the trauma of their sister's abuse and death in a public courtroom. The siblings testified that Jessie had been beaten by their mother, that she had been confined to a closet, that she had been deprived of food while the other children ate, that their mother had treated Jessie with particular cruelty. They testified that Jessie had died from this abuse and that their mother had disposed of the body to cover up what she had done. The prosecution also presented medical experts who testified about the effects of the kin D of abuse Jessie had suffered. They explained how malnutrition, beatings, and confinement could lead to death, particularly in a young child. Forensic experts testified about evidence found in the home that was consistent with the abuse allegations. There were bloodstains. There was evidence of cleaning that suggested an attempt to destroy evidence. The prosecution argued that Jerice Hunter had murdered her 5-year-old daughter through sustained, severe abuse, and then had concocted a false story about the child's disappearance to avoid responsibility for what she had done. Jerice Hunter's defense team faced an uphill battle. The evidence against her was substantial, and the testimony from her own children was damning. The defense strategy focused on creating reasonable doubt. They argued that without a body, without a definitive cause and manner of death, the prosecution couldn't prove beyond a reasonable doubt that murder had occurred. They suggested alternative explanations for Jessie's disappearance. Perhaps she really had been abducted. Perhaps something else had happened to her that Jerice wasn't responsible for. But the defense couldn't explain away the testimony from the other children. They couldn't explain the evidence of abuse in the home. They couldn't provide a credible alternative theory that accounted for all the facts. After hearing all the evidence and deliberating on the facts, the jury returned their verdict: guilty. Jerice Hunter was convicted of first-degree murder in the death of Jessie Shockley. She was also convicted of child abuse and other related charges. The verdict was a victory for prosecutors and for those who had advocated for justice for Jessie. Even without a body, even without being able to prove the exact moment and manner of death, the jury had determined that Jerice Hunter had killed her daughter. At the sentencing hearing, the courtroom heard from family members and others who had known Jessie. They spoke about the bright, beautiful child who had deserved so much better than the life she had been given. They spoke about their grief at losing Jessie, their anger at Jerice for what she had done, their frustration that Jessie's body had never been recovered, denying them the ability to lay her to rest properly. The prosecutor asked the court to impose the maximum sentence. Jerice Hunter had killed a defenseless 5-year-old child. She had abused and tormented that child before finally killing her. She had lied about what happened and had deprived the family of even the closure of recovering Jessie's body. The defense asked for some measure of mercy, though there was little they could argue that would mitigate the severity of what Jerice had done. The judge, in pronouncing sentence, noted the particular vulnerability of the victim. Jessie was a small child who depended entirely on her mother for survival. Instead of protecting and nurturing her daughter, Jerice had abused her to the point of death. Jerice Hunter was sentenced to natural life in prison without the possibility of parole, plus 20 additional years for the other charges. She will spend the rest of her life behind bars. She will never know freedom again. She will die in prison, decades from now, while Jessie remains forever 5 years old. Jerice Hunter's other 4 children were left to deal with the aftermath of their mother's crimes. They had lost their sister. They had lost their mother, though not in a way that generates sympathy. These children had witnessed abuse. They had testified in court about what they saw. They had to live with the knowledge that their mother had killed their sister and that they had been unable to stop it. The trauma these children experienced will likely affect them for the rest of their lives. They will need ongoing support, therapy, and care to process what they went through and to build healthy lives despite their horrific start. One of the most painful aspects of Jessie's case is that there were warning signs. There had been previous CPS involvement. People had noticed that something was wrong. Reports had been made. Yet the system failed to protect Jessie. She was returned to her mother's care, where the abuse continued and ultimately ended in her death. This case prompted discussions about child welfare systems, about how decisions are made regarding returning children to their parents, and about what more can be done to protect vulnerable children. Unfortunately, child protective services are underfunded and overwhelmed in many jurisdictions. Social workers have huge caseloads and must make difficult decisions with limited information. Sometimes, tragically, children fall through the cracks and terrible outcomes result. Jerice Hunter is currently incarcerated in the Arizona Department of Corrections. She is in her 50s now. She has been in prison for nearly a decade and will remain there for the rest of her natural life. She will never attend another family gathering, never celebrate another holiday outside of prison, never experience freedom again. Her life is now defined by the concrete and steel of her prison cell. Meanwhile, somewhere, Jessie Shockley's remains lie in an unknown location. Her family has never been able to lay her to rest properly. They don't have a grave to visit on her birthday or on holidays. Jessie would be 18 years old now. She would be graduating from high school this year. She could be thinking about college, about her future career, about all the possibilities that life offers young adults. Instead, her life ended at age 5, in terror and pain, at the hands of the person who should have protected her above all others. The case of Jerice Hunter and Jesse Shockley offers several important lessons. First, it demonstrates that murder convictions are possible even without a body, though they require strong circumstantial evidence and often the testimony of witnesses. Second, it highlights the critical importance of child welfare systems and the need for adequate funding and staffing to protect vulnerable children. Third, it shows the importance of mandatory reporting laws and of community members being willing to report suspicions of child abuse. While reports were made in Jesse's case, perhaps if more people had spoken up sooner, her death might have been prevented. Finally, it reminds us that child abuse often escalates. What starts as excessive punishment can escalate to severe abuse and ultimately to death. Early intervention is crucial. Jesse Shockley was more than just a victim in a true crime case. She was a real little girl with a personality, with likes and dislikes, with potential that was never realized. Those who knew her remember her smile. They remember a child who, despite the abuse she suffered, still had moments of joy and playfulness. Jessie deserved to grow up in a safe, loving home. She deserved to go to school, make friends, discover her talents and interests, and become whoever she was meant to be. Instead, she suffered and died at age 5, and her body was disposed of like garbage by the person who gave her life. The case of Jerice Hunter stands as a heartbreaking example of child abuse leading to death, of a mother who violated the most sacred duty of parenthood, and of a system that failed to protect a vulnerable child until it was too late. Jerice Hunter will spend the rest of her life in prison, but no punishment can undo the harm she caused or bring back the beautiful little girl whose life she stole. If cases like this one move you to support child welfare and protection, please like this video and subscribe to Cold Case Time. We're dedicated to giving voices to victims who can no longer speak for themselves. Case 7. Elizabeth Archibeque, the Flagstaff Starvation Death. Flagstaff, Arizona. 2020. A 6-year-old boy named Deshaun Martinez should have been in 1st grade, learning to read, playing with friends, experiencing the joys of childhood. Instead, Deshaun was confined to a closet in his mother's apartment, systematically starved until his small body could no longer sustain life. This is the case of Elizabeth Archibeque and her husband Anthony Martinez, who subjected Deshaun to horrific abuse that ultimately led to his death from starvation, one of the most painful and prolonged ways a human being can die. Deshaun Martinez was just 6 years old when he died. He was Elizabeth Archibeque's son, though Elizabeth and Deshaun's father were no longer together. Elizabeth had since married Anthony Martinez. Deshaun had an older brother who also lived in the home. But the treatment of the two boys was vastly different. While the older brother was fed and cared for, Deshaun was singled out for abuse. This differential treatment of children in the same household is a disturbing pattern seen in some child abuse cases. One child becomes the scapegoat, the target of the parents' rage or resentment, while other children in the home may be treated relatively normally. Deshaun was that scapegoat, and that role would cost him his life. The abuse Deshaun suffered was both physical and psychological, and it was prolonged over a significant period of time. Elizabeth Archibeque and her husband Anthony Martinez kept Deshaun confined to a closet in their apartment. This wasn't occasional punishment. This was where the boy essentially lived. He was locked in the closet for extended periods, sometimes for days at a time. But the confinement wasn't the worst of it. Deshaun was systematically starved. While the rest of the family ate regular meals, Deshaun was deprived of food. He was given inadequate nutrition and in insufficient quantities. Over time, the effects of starvation began to show. Deshaun's body consumed its own muscle and fat for energy. His organs began to fail. He would have experienced constant hunger, weakness, pain, and confusion. The older brother, who witnessed some of what was happening, would later provide testimony about the conditions Deshaun was kept in. But at the time, as a child himself living in an abusive household, he was unable to effectively intervene or seek help. In March of 2020, 6-year-old Deshaun Martinez died in the closet where he had been confined. The medical examiner would later determine that the cause of death was starvation. Deshaun's body had been so deprived of nutrition that his organs had shut down. He had literally been starved to death by his own mother and stepfather. When Deshaun died, Elizabeth and Anthony faced a choice: call for help immediately or try to cover up what they had done. They chose the latter. There are reports that they kept Deshawn's body in the apartment for a period of time after his death before finally reporting it. The exact timeline hasn't been fully disclosed, but it's clear that they didn't immediately seek help when the child died. When they finally did report Deshawn's death, their explanations for his condition immediately raised red flags with investigators. Flagstaff Police Department investigators responded to the report of a deceased child. What they found when they examined Deshawn's body was shocking. The child was severely emaciated. His body showed clear signs of prolonged starvation. His weight was far below what it should have been for a 6-year-old boy. Medical personnel could see that this child had not died from sudden illness or accident, but from sustained deprivation of basic nutrition. The condition of Deshawn's body told a story of prolonged suffering. This wasn't a case of a child who had missed a few meals. This was systematic starvation over an extended period. Investigators interviewed the older brother, who provided critical information about what had been happening in the home. He described how Deshawn had been kept in the closet, how he had been denied food, how his condition had deteriorated over time. Detectives also examined the apartment and found evidence corroborating the abuse. The closet where Deshawn had been confined. Evidence of the differential treatment between the two children. As the investigation progressed, the full scope of what Elizabeth Archibeque and Anthony Martinez had done became clear. They had systematically tortured and starved a 6-year-old child to death. Both Elizabeth Archibeque and Anthony Martinez were arrested and charged with first-degree murder and multiple counts of child abuse. The first-degree murder charge was based on the theory that they had killed Deshawn through deliberate and sustained deprivation of food, essentially torturing him to death over a period of time. The child abuse charges reflected the broader pattern of abuse that Deshawn had suffered, the confinement, the physical mistreatment, and other acts of abuse beyond just the starvation. Both defendants faced the possibility of spending the rest of their lives in prison if convicted. The legal process in this case was complicated by the fact that there were 2 defendants, both of whom were culpable for Deshawn's death. While Anthony Martinez was also charged and prosecuted, our focus here is on Elizabeth Archibeque, Deshawn's biological mother, the person who had the primary duty to protect and nurture this child. Elizabeth faced a choice: fight the charges at trial or accept responsibility through a plea agreement. Fighting the charges would mean putting the older brother through the trauma of testifying at trial. It would mean extensive media coverage and a lengthy legal battle. And given the strength of the evidence against her, it would likely still result in a conviction. Elizabeth Archibeque made the decision to plead guilty to first-degree murder and child abuse charges. By pleading guilty, she accepted responsibility for starving her 6-year-old son to death. She acknowledged that she had confined him, deprived him of food, and caused his death through her actions and her failures to act. The guilty plea meant there would be no trial. The case would proceed directly to sentencing, where the court would determine what punishment was appropriate for someone who had committed such heinous acts against her own child. In July of 2023, 3 years after Deshawn's death, Elizabeth Archibeque appeared in court for sentencing. The sentencing hearing was an emotional proceeding. Family members spoke about Deshawn, the bright, loving child he had been before the abuse began. They spoke about their grief and their rage at what Elizabeth had done. The prosecutor emphasized the particular cruelty of Deshawn's death. Starvation is one of the most painful ways to die. It is slow, agonizing, and terrifying. Deshawn would have known he was hungry. He would have begged for food. He would have suffered tremendously before finally succumbing. And all of this suffering was inflicted on him by his own mother, the person who should have been his primary protector and caregiver. The defense offered little in mitigation. There is no excuse for starving a child to death. No explanation that makes such conduct understandable or forgivable. The judge, in pronouncing sentence, expressed horror at what Elizabeth had done. The court noted that Elizabeth had violated the most fundamental duty of a parent. She had not just failed to protect her child, she had actively tortured him over an extended period until he died. Elizabeth Archibeque was sentenced to natural life in prison without the possibility of parole. She will spend the rest of her life behind bars. She will never know freedom again. She will die in prison, decades from now, while Deshawn remains forever 6 years old. Anthony Martinez, Elizabeth's husband and Deshawn's stepfather, was also prosecuted for his role in the child's death. While Elizabeth was Deshawn's biological mother and therefore had a particular duty to protect him. Anthony was also culpable. He participated in confining the child. He participated in starving him. He failed to intervene or seek help as Deshawn deteriorated and died. Anthony Martinez also received a substantial prison sentence for his role in Deshawn's death, ensuring that both adults responsible for this tragedy would spend many years, if not the rest of their lives, behind bars. One of the most tragic aspects of this case is the impact on Deshawn's older brother, who witnessed much of the abuse and has had to live with the trauma of what he saw. This child lost his younger brother. He had to testify about what happened. He has to live with survivor's guilt, the question of whether there was more he could have done. Even though as a child himself in an abusive home, he had limited power to change the situation. The older brother was placed in protective custody and hopefully received the therapy and support necessary to process what he had experienced. But the trauma of witnessing his brother's slow death will likely affect him for the rest of his life. As with many child abuse death cases, the question arises, could this have been prevented? Were there warning signs that were missed? Were there opportunities for intervention that didn't happen? In cases of severe child abuse, there are often indicators that something is wrong. Children who are being abused may appear malnourished, fearful, or withdrawn. They may miss school frequently. Neighbors or other family members may notice concerning signs. Whether such warning signs were present and noticed in Deshawn's case is not fully clear from public records. What is clear is that the abuse was able to continue long enough to result in the child's death, a systemic failure regardless of the specific circumstances. Elizabeth Archibeque is currently incarcerated in the Arizona Department of Corrections. She is serving her natural life sentence without the possibility of parole. She will spend her days in a prison cell, eating regular meals that her son Deshawn begged for but was denied. She will have shelter, medical care, and the basic necessities of life, all things she failed to provide to her child. She will grow old in prison. She will experience birthdays and holidays, though not in freedom. She will have decades to think about what she did, to remember her son, to live with the knowledge that she tortured her own child to death. Meanwhile, in a cemetery in Arizona, there is a grave marking the final resting place of Deshawn Martinez. He would be 10 years old now. He should be in elementary school, learning math and science, playing sports, making friends. Instead, his life ended at age 6, after months of torture, starvation, and suffering at the hands of his mother. The case of Elizabeth Archibeque and Deshawn Martinez highlights several critical issues. First, it demonstrates the devastating impact of differential treatment of children within a household. When one child is singled out for abuse while others are treated relatively normally, that child is at extreme risk. Second, it underscores the importance of teachers, doctors, and others who interact with children being alert to signs of abuse and neglect. Regular school attendance and medical checkups can provide opportunities to identify children who are being harmed. Third, it shows the need for robust investigation of child abuse allegations and for protective services to have the resources and authority to intervene when children are at risk. Finally, it reminds us that abuse can escalate. What might start as excessive punishment or occasional deprivation can escalate to systematic torture and death if not interrupted. Deshawn Martinez deserves to be remembered as more than just a victim in a horrific abuse case. He was a real child with a personality, with interests, with potential. Those who knew him before the worst abuse began remember a normal little boy who liked to play and laugh. Deshawn endured unimaginable suffering in the final months of his life. He was hungry, scared, in pain, and confused about why his mother was treating him this way. He died alone in a closet, his small body finally giving up after being deprived of the nutrition it needed to survive. No child should ever have to experience what Deshawn experienced. Every child deserves to be fed, to be safe, to be loved and protected by their parents. The case of Elizabeth Archibeque stands as one of the most disturbing examples of child abuse leading to death in Arizona history. It's a reminder that evil can exist even in the relationship between mother and child, and that some people are capable of inflicting unimaginable suffering on the most vulnerable among us. Elizabeth Archibeque will never see freedom again. But no punishment can undo what she did or bring back the little boy whose life she stole. Your support helps us continue this important work. Please like this video and subscribe to Cold Case Time to stay updated on our coverage of these critical cases. Case 8. Denise Janelle Snow-Ingram. Malnutrition and medical neglect death. Phoenix, Arizona. October 7, 2013. Emergency responders rushed to a residence after receiving a call about an unresponsive toddler. What they found was a 16-month-old baby girl whose tiny body had been ravaged by severe malnutrition and complete medical neglect. This is the case of Denise Janelle Snow-Ingram, a mother who allowed her infant daughter to waste away from starvation and denied her any medical care, even as the child's condition became obviously life-threatening. While Denise Snow-Ingram did not actively murder her daughter in the way some of the other mothers in this documentary did, her extreme neglect was just as deadly and just as criminal. The victim in this case was a 16-month-old baby girl. Out of respect for the child's privacy and family, we'll refer to her simply as Baby V. Baby V should have been a healthy, thriving toddler. At 16 months old, she should have been learning to walk, beginning to say words, exploring the world around her with the curiosity that all toddlers possess. Instead, Baby V was severely malnourished, weighing far less than a healthy child her age should weigh. Her body was shutting down from lack of nutrition. She was dying, slowly and painfully, while her mother did nothing to help her. The neglect that Baby V suffered wasn't a matter of days or weeks. This was prolonged, severe, and obvious neglect that occurred over an extended period of time. Baby V was not being fed adequately. Whether this was because Denise Snow-Ingram simply wasn't feeding the child, was feeding her inadequate amounts, or was feeding her inappropriate foods isn't entirely clear from public records. What is clear is that the child was severely malnourished. Malnutrition in infants and toddlers has obvious physical signs. The child becomes thin and frail. Their growth is stunted. They become lethargic and weak. They may cry constantly from hunger or, in severe cases, become too weak to cry. Anyone who looked at Baby V would have been able to see that something was seriously wrong with this child. Her condition would have been obvious to any parent, caregiver, or medical professional who saw her. But Denise Snow-Ingram not only failed to feed her daughter adequately, she also failed to seek any medical care for the child, even as Baby V's condition deteriorated. On October 7, 2013, Baby V stopped breathing. Her small body, weakened by months of malnutrition, could no longer sustain life. When emergency responders arrived, they attempted to resuscitate the child, but it was too late. Baby V was transported to a hospital, where she was pronounced dead. The medical personnel who examined Baby V were shocked by her condition. This was not a child who had suddenly become ill. This was a child who had been systematically starved and denied medical care over an extended period. The hospital immediately contacted law enforcement. This was not a natural death. This was not an unfortunate accident. This was criminal neglect that had resulted in the death of a child. Phoenix Police Department detectives began investigating the circumstances of Baby V's death. The medical examiner conducted an autopsy and determined that the cause of death was severe malnutrition and medical neglect. Baby V had essentially starved to death while in her mother's care. The autopsy revealed that Baby V weighed significantly less than a healthy 16-month-old should weigh. Her body showed signs of chronic malnutrition. There were no signs of acute trauma or injury. This child had died from being slowly starved and denied necessary medical care. Investigators interviewed Denise Snow-Ingram about her daughter's care. They asked about feeding schedules, about medical appointments, about whether she had noticed that her daughter was underweight and unwell. The investigation revealed that Denise had not taken Baby V for regular pediatric checkups. She had not sought medical care even when the child's condition became obviously concerning. She had failed in her most basic duty as a parent, to ensure that her child was fed and received necessary medical care. Denise Janelle Snow-Ingram was arrested and charged with bullet operator second-degree murder, bullet operator child abuse. The second-degree murder charge was based on the theory that Denise had caused Baby V's death through extreme neglect, that she had known or should have known that her failure to feed and provide medical care for her daughter would result in death, and that she had acted with extreme indifference to human life. The child abuse charges reflected the broader pattern of neglect that Baby V had suffered. It's worth noting that Denise Snow-Ingram was charged with second-degree murder rather than first-degree murder. First-degree murder typically requires premeditation, a deliberate plan to kill someone. In cases where a parent actively kills a child through direct violence, first-degree murder charges are common. Second-degree murder, by contrast, involves causing someone's death through extremely reckless conduct or with extreme indifference to human life, but without necessarily planning the death in advance. In Denise's case, prosecutors likely believe they could prove that she had acted with extreme indifference to baby V's life, that she had known or should have known her daughter was starving and needed medical care, and that her failure to provide these basic necessities showed a depraved indifference to whether the child lived or died. This is still murder under the law, even if it doesn't involve the same level of active intent as first-degree murder cases. The case against Denise Snow-Ingram moved through the court system. The evidence was clear. Baby V had died from malnutrition and medical neglect while in Denise's care. Medical experts would testify about the signs of malnutrition that would have been visible on baby V's body. Pediatricians would explain how any reasonable parent would have recognized that something was seriously wrong with this child and would have sought help. The prosecution would argue that Denise's failure to feed her daughter and to seek medical care, despite obvious signs that the child was severely ill, constituted murder under Arizona law. The defense would likely argue that Denise didn't intend for her daughter to die, that perhaps she was overwhelmed or didn't understand the severity of the situation. But the law doesn't require intent to kill for a second-degree murder conviction. It requires extreme indifference to human life, and the facts of this case clearly demonstrated that. Denise Janelle Snow-Ingram was convicted of second-degree murder and child abuse in the death of her 16-month-old daughter. The jury found that she had caused baby V's death through extreme neglect and had shown a depraved indifference to whether her daughter lived or died. The conviction meant that Denise would face significant prison time. Second-degree murder in Arizona carries substantial penalties, and when the victim is a child, sentences are typically on the higher end of the sentencing range. The sentencing hearing took place in January of 2024, more than 10 years after baby V's death. This lengthy delay between the crime and sentencing is not uncommon in complex criminal cases. At the sentencing hearing, the court heard about the suffering baby V had endured. Medical experts described how painful it is to starve to death, the constant hunger, the weakness, the body consuming its own tissues for energy, the eventual organ failure. The prosecutor argued that while Denise Snow-Ingram may not have actively murdered her daughter in the traditional sense, her extreme neglect was just as deadly and just as culpable. She had a duty to care for her infant daughter, and she had catastrophically failed in that duty. Family members spoke about their loss and their grief. They spoke about baby V, the beautiful child who should be 11 years old now, in elementary school, growing and thriving. The judge, in pronouncing sentence, noted that while this was not a case of active violence against a child, it was in some ways equally disturbing. Denise had watched her daughter waste away from malnutrition. She had seen the child's deteriorating condition, and she had done nothing. Denise Janelle Snow-Ingram was sentenced to 37 years in prison. While this is not a life sentence in the traditional sense, given Denise's age at sentencing, 37 years represents a very long period of incarceration. She will be an elderly woman if she ever walks free again. Denise Snow-Ingram's case represents a different type of maternal killing than some of the other cases in this documentary. She didn't actively suffocate, stab, or poison her child. She didn't use a weapon. She didn't commit an act of obvious violence. Instead, she killed her daughter through inaction, through failing to feed her, failing to seek medical care, failing to do the basic things that parents must do to keep their children alive. But the law recognizes that killing through neglect is still killing. A parent has an affirmative duty to provide for their child's basic needs. When a parent fails in that duty and the child dies as a result, the parent is criminally responsible. This type of case, death by neglect, is actually more common than many people realize. Every year, children die from malnutrition, from untreated medical conditions, from being left in unsafe environments, because their parents or caregivers failed to provide basic care. One question that often arises in neglect cases is, did the parent intend for the child to die? In Denise Snow-Ingram's case, there's no evidence that she actively wanted her daughter to die. She likely didn't wake up one day and decide to starve her child to death. But the law doesn't require that kind of specific intent for a murder conviction. What matters is whether the defendant acted with extreme indifference to human life, whether they knew or should have known that their conduct would likely result in death, and they did it anyway. When a parent watches their child waste away from malnutrition over weeks or months, when they see the child becoming weaker and more ill, when they recognize that something is seriously wrong, and when they still don't seek help, that demonstrates the kind of extreme indifference that the law treats as murder. Denise Janelle Snow-Ingram is currently incarcerated in the Arizona Department of Corrections, serving her 37-year sentence. She has been in prison for several years now and has many more years ahead of her before she would be eligible for release. She is being fed regular meals in prison, meals that her daughter begged for but was denied. She has access to medical care, care that she failed to provide to baby V. She has shelter, clothing, and the basic necessities of life, all things a parent is supposed to provide to their child. Meanwhile, baby V's grave marks the final resting place of a child who barely had a chance to experience life. She would be 11 years old now. She should be in 5th or 6th grade, learning and growing and discovering who she is. Instead, her life ended at 16 months old, her tiny body unable to survive the extreme neglect inflicted on her by her mother. The case of Denise Snow-Ingram and baby V highlights several important issues. First, it demonstrates that not all child killings involve active violence. Neglect can be just as deadly as physical abuse, and parents who fail to provide basic necessities can be held criminally responsible when their children die. Second, it underscores the importance of regular pediatric care. Well baby checkups aren't just bureaucratic requirements. They're opportunities for medical professionals to assess whether a child is thriving and to identify problems early. Third, it shows the importance of community awareness. Neighbors, family members, and others who interact with families may notice signs of neglect and have a responsibility to report concerns to authorities. Finally, it reminds us that poverty and lack of resources, while they can create challenges for parents, are not excuses for failing to feed a child or seek medical care. Free and low-cost resources are available in most communities for families struggling to provide basic care. Baby V was just 16 months old when she died, but her life mattered. She was a real person who experienced the world, who felt hunger and pain, who deserved to be cared for and protected. In her short life, baby V knew suffering that no child should ever experience. She was hungry. She was weak. She was in pain. And the person who should have comforted her and helped her, her mother, did nothing. Baby V deserved to grow up. She deserved to experience childhood, to go to school, to make friends, to discover her interests and talents, to become whoever she was meant to be. Instead, that potential was extinguished at 16 months old because her mother failed in the most basic duty of parenthood. The case of Denise Janelle Snow-Ingram serves as a stark reminder that child abuse and neglect take many forms, and that killing through inaction is still killing. While Denise may not spend the rest of her life in prison like some of the other mothers in this documentary, her 37-year sentence ensures she will spend decades paying for her failure to protect her daughter. If you believe in holding those who harm children accountable, please show your support by liking this video and subscribing to Cold Case Time. Case 9. Phoeteama Neal, the Goodyear Drowning. Goodyear, Arizona. August 24, 2014. A young mother called 911 to report that her 20-month-old daughter had drowned in the bathtub. But as investigators examined the circumstances of the child's death, they discovered that this was no accident. This was murder, a mother who had deliberately drowned her own toddler daughter. This is the case of Phoeteama Neal, a 22-year-old woman who killed her baby daughter Victoria in an act of violence that shocked the West Valley community. Victoria Neal was just 20 months old when her life was stolen from her. She was a toddler in that magical stage of development when children are learning to walk and talk, exploring the world with wide-eyed wonder. 20-month-old children are utterly dependent on their parents. They trust completely. They don't understand danger. They can't protect themselves. They rely on their mothers and fathers to keep them safe. Victoria trusted her mother, Phoeteama Neal. She had no way of knowing that the person who was supposed to protect her above all others would be the one to end her life. On August 24, 2014, Phoeteama Neal drowned her daughter Victoria in the bathtub of their Goodyear home. Drowning is a terrifying way to die, The victim is conscious and aware as water fills their lungs. They struggle for air that doesn't come. They experience panic and terror in their final moments. For a toddler like Victoria, who didn't understand what was happening, the experience would have been utterly horrific. She would have struggled. She would have looked to her mother for help. And instead of rescuing her, Phoeteama was the one holding her under the water. After Victoria was dead, Phoeteama called 911 and reported that her daughter had drowned in the bathtub. When Goodyear Police Department officers and emergency responders arrived at the scene, they attempted to resuscitate Victoria, but the child was already gone. Investigators immediately began examining the circumstances of the drowning. In cases where young children drown in bathtubs, there are usually clear indicators of whether the death was accidental or intentional. Accidental bathtub drownings typically occur when a child is left unsupervised, even briefly. A toddler can drown in just inches of water in a matter of minutes. Parents and caregivers are warned to never leave young children alone in the bath, even for a moment. But the circumstances of Victoria's death didn't fit the pattern of an accidental drowning. The physical evidence, the scene, and Phoeteama's own statements raised red flags for investigators. Detectives interviewed Phoeteama extensively. As they questioned her about what had happened, inconsistencies emerged in her story. The timeline didn't make sense. Her explanations didn't match the physical evidence. Eventually, the investigation revealed the truth. Phoeteama Neal had deliberately drowned her daughter Victoria. This was not an accident. This was murder. One of the questions in any murder case is, why? What motivated the killer to take another person's life? In cases of maternal filicide, mothers killing their children, motives can vary widely. Some mothers kill in the grip of severe mental illness, genuinely believing they're protecting their children from something worse. Some kill out of revenge against a partner. Some kill because they see their children as obstacles to the life they want. Some kill because they're overwhelmed and see no other way out. The specific motive in Phoeteama Neal's case has not been fully disclosed in public records. What is clear is that she made a deliberate decision to end her daughter's life, and she carried out that decision by drowning the child. Phoeteama Neal was arrested and charged with first-degree murder in the death of her daughter Victoria. The first-degree murder charge indicated that prosecutors believed Phoeteama had killed Victoria with premeditation, that this was a deliberate, planned act, not a crime of passion or a momentary loss of control. The evidence supported this theory. Drowning a child takes time. It requires sustained action. The parent has to hold the child under the water while the child struggles, while the child's survival instincts kick in, while the child fights for life. This isn't something that happens in an instant of rage. It requires deliberate, sustained effort. If convicted of first-degree murder, Phoeteama faced the possibility of spending the rest of her life in prison. The case against Phoeteama Neal moved through the Maricopa County court system. The prosecution had strong evidence. The physical evidence from the scene, forensic analysis of Victoria's body, and statements that Phoeteama had made to investigators. The defense would have to decide whether to take the case to trial or negotiate a plea agreement. Taking the case to trial meant risking an even harsher sentence if convicted. But it also meant the possibility, however slim, of an acquittal or conviction on a lesser charge. The specific details of the legal proceedings haven't been extensively reported in public sources, but what is known is that Phoeteama Neal was ultimately convicted of murdering her daughter. Phoeteama Neal was convicted of first-degree murder in the death of 20-month-old Victoria Neal. In September of 2017, 3 years after she had drowned her daughter, Phoeteama stood before a judge for sentencing. The sentencing hearing would have been an emotional proceeding. Family members who had loved Victoria spoke about the beautiful toddler who had been stolen from them. They spoke about birthdays that would never be celebrated, first days of school that would never happen, a whole life that was taken before it barely began. The prosecutor argued for the maximum sentence allowed under law. Phoeteama had deliberately killed her own child in one of the most frightening ways possible. She had held her baby underwater while Victoria struggled and fought for her life. She had shown no mercy to a helpless toddler who trusted her completely. The defense may have argued for some degree of leniency, possibly presenting evidence of mental health struggles or difficult circumstances. But there is no circumstance that justifies drowning one's own child. The judge, in pronouncing sentence, noted the particular vulnerability of the victim and the breach of trust inherent in a mother murdering her own baby. Phoeteama Neal was sentenced to natural life in prison without the possibility of parole. She will never leave prison. She will spend the rest of her days behind bars, never again knowing freedom, never again experiencing life outside of concrete walls and steel bars. Victoria's death left a hole in the lives of those who loved her. Grandparents, aunts, uncles, and other family members who had cherished this little girl had to process the unthinkable reality that she had been murdered by her own mother. They had to attend a funeral for a 20-month-old baby. They had to bury a child who should have been just beginning her life. They had to face a future where Victoria would never grow up, never call them, never give them hugs, never make them proud. The grief that follows the murder of a child is particularly intense and long-lasting. Unlike natural deaths, which can sometimes be accepted as part of life cycle, murder creates a wound that never fully heals. The knowledge that Victoria's death was intentional, that it could have been prevented, that it was inflicted by her own mother, all of this compounds the trauma. Phoeteama Neal is currently incarcerated in the Arizona Department of Corrections. She is in her early 30s now. She has been in prison for approximately 8 years and will remain there for the rest of her natural life. She will grow old in prison. She will experience birthdays, holidays, and the passage of seasons, but always within the confines of her cell. She will never attend another family gathering, never celebrate another milestone, never experience freedom again. Meanwhile, in a cemetery somewhere in Arizona, there is a small grave marking the final resting place of Victoria Neal. She would be 11 years old now, in elementary school, a bright and curious student with her whole life ahead of her. Instead, her life ended at 20 months old, in a bathtub, at the hands of her mother. Bathtub drownings of children fall into 2 categories: accidental and intentional. Accidental bathtub drownings are tragically common. They typically occur when a young child is left unsupervised in the bath, even for just a minute or two. A parent might step away to answer the phone, grab a towel, or tend to another child. In that brief moment, a toddler can slip under the water and drown. These accidental deaths are heartbreaking, and parents whose children die this way typically suffer profound guilt and grief. However, they're not prosecuted for murder because there was no intent to harm the child. It was a terrible accident resulting from a momentary lapse in supervision. Intentional drownings, by contrast, involve a parent or caregiver deliberately holding a child underwater until they die. These cases are prosecuted as murder because the death was not accidental. It was the result of deliberate action intended to kill. The evidence in Victoria Neal's case clearly indicated that her death was intentional, not accidental. That's why Phoeteama was charged with and convicted of first-degree murder. The case of Phoeteama Neal and Victoria offers several important lessons. First, it reminds us that not all drowning deaths of children are accidents. When a young child drowns in a bathtub, investigators must carefully examine the circumstances to determine whether it was truly accidental or potentially intentional. Second, it highlights the importance of mental health support for new mothers. While we don't know the specific circumstances that led Phoeteama to kill her daughter, many cases of maternal filicide involve mothers experiencing severe mental health crises. Better screening, support, and treatment might prevent some of these tragedies. Third, it underscores that family members and others who interact with families should be alert to signs of struggling parents and should offer support or connect them with resources. Finally, it reminds us that children are vulnerable and dependent on adults to protect them. When those adults violate that trust in the most fundamental way, society must hold them accountable. Victoria Neal was only 20 months old, but her life mattered. She was a real child with a personality, with a smile that lit up rooms, with the potential to become anyone and do anything. In her short life, Victoria experienced love from family members who cherished her. She took her first steps. She said her first words. She explored the world with the curiosity that all toddlers possess. But her life was cut brutally short by the person who should have protected her above all others, her mother. Victoria deserved to grow up. She deserved to go to preschool, to make friends, to discover her interests and talents. She deserved to experience all the joys and challenges of childhood, adolescence, and adulthood. Instead, all of that potential was destroyed when she was just 20 months old. The case of Phoeteama Neal stands as a tragic example of maternal filicide, a mother who violated the most sacred bond of parenthood and who will spend the rest of her life paying for that violation. Phoeteama Neal will never see freedom again. But no punishment can undo what she did or bring back the beautiful baby girl whose life she stole. Please support our mission of telling these important stories by liking this video and subscribing to Cold Case Time. These victims deserve to be remembered. Case 10. Kimmery Jorg. Severe abuse and torture of adopted daughters. Peoria, Arizona. 2014. Two young sisters, adopted into what should have been a loving home, were instead subjected to years of horrific abuse, starvation, and torture at the hands of the woman who was supposed to be their mother. This is the case of Kimmery Jorg, a woman who, along with her husband, systematically abused two adopted daughters in ways that shocked investigators and prosecutors. While this case differs from the others in this documentary, the children survived their abuse. The severity of what these girls endured, and the fact that Kimmery Jorg will spend decades in prison for her crimes, makes it a fitting conclusion to our examination of Arizona's most evil mothers. The victims in this case are two sisters who were adopted by Kimmery Jorg and her husband Thomas when the girls were young. Out of respect for these survivors' privacy, we'll refer to them as Sister A and Sister B. These girls came into the Jorg household hoping for a better life. They had been in the foster care system and needed a permanent, loving home. Kimmery and Thomas Jorg seemed to offer that opportunity. But instead of love and stability, these girls found themselves trapped in a house of horrors where they were systematically abused, starved, and tortured over a period of years. The abuse that Sister A and Sister B suffered was extensive, prolonged, and shocking in its cruelty. The girls were systematically starved. They were given inadequate food while other members of the household ate regular meals. They became severely malnourished, their bodies showing the clear physical signs of prolonged starvation. They were beaten and physically abused. The violence they endured left bruises, marks, and injuries that were documented by investigators and medical personnel once the abuse was finally discovered. They were forced to sleep outside, even in cold weather. Imagine being a child, forced to sleep on the ground outside your home while your adoptive parents and their biological children slept in warm beds inside. They were subjected to other forms of psychological torture and humiliation designed to degrade and control them. This wasn't occasional discipline that went too far. This wasn't parents who lost their tempers from time to time. This was systematic, ongoing abuse that occurred day after day, month after month, year after year. One of the most disturbing aspects of this case is that Kimmery and Thomas Jorg had biological children who lived in the same household, and those children were treated vastly differently from the adopted sisters. The biological children were fed properly. They slept in beds inside the house. They attended school regularly. They were treated like normal children. But Sister A and Sister B were singled out for abuse. They were the scapegoats, the targets of Kimmery's cruelty. This differential treatment is a pattern seen in some cases of severe child abuse. Sometimes an abusive parent targets one or more children while treating others relatively normally. The targeted children may remind the parent of someone they resent, or they may simply become the focus of the parent's anger and control issues for reasons that make sense only to the abuser. Whatever the reason, Sister A and Sister B suffered tremendously while other children in the same household lived relatively normal lives. The abuse of Sister A and Sister B was eventually discovered and reported to authorities. The specific circumstances of the discovery haven't been fully detailed in public records, but at some point, someone, perhaps a teacher, a neighbor, a medical professional, or someone else, noticed signs of abuse and reported it. When authorities investigated, they were horrified by what they found. The girls were severely malnourished. They showed signs of physical abuse. They reported being forced to sleep outside and being subjected to various forms of mistreatment. Medical examinations confirmed the abuse. The girls' physical condition showed clear evidence of prolonged starvation and physical trauma. Peoria Police Department and Child Protective Services worked together to remove the girls from the home and to build a criminal case against Kimmery and Thomas Jorg. Investigators documented the extensive abuse that Sister A and Sister B had suffered. They photographed the girls' injuries and malnourished condition. They interviewed the girls about what they had experienced. They examined the conditions in the Jorg home. They also interviewed neighbors, teachers, and others who might have information about the family. Had anyone noticed that something was wrong? Had there been any previous reports of concern? The investigation revealed a pattern of systematic abuse that had occurred over a period of years. This wasn't a recent development. These girls had been suffering for a long time before anyone intervened. Kimmery Jorg was arrested and charged with multiple counts of child abuse. The specific charges reflected the various forms of abuse she had inflicted on the girls: physical abuse, starvation, and other cruel treatment. While the girls had survived, unlike the child victims in most of the other cases in this documentary, the severity of the abuse they had suffered meant that Kimmery faced serious prison time. Her husband Thomas was also charged in connection with the abuse, though our focus here is on Kimmery as the primary perpetrator and the mother figure who had betrayed her duty to these adopted daughters. The case against Kimmery Jorg moved through the Maricopa County court system. The prosecution had strong evidence: the girls' testimony, medical documentation of their injuries and malnutrition, photographs, and other evidence of the abuse. The defense would have to contend with overwhelming evidence of systematic abuse of children in Kimmery's care. There was no denying that the abuse had occurred. The question was what sentence she would receive. Kimmery Jorg was convicted of multiple counts of child abuse related to her treatment of Sister A and Sister B. The convictions reflected the jury's finding that she had systematically abused these adopted daughters, causing them severe physical and psychological harm. In October of 2018, Kimmery Jorg appeared in court for sentencing on the child abuse convictions. The sentencing hearing included testimony from experts about the harm the girls had suffered. Psychologists explained the long-term psychological impact of the kind of abuse Sister A and Sister B had endured. Medical professionals described the physical effects of prolonged starvation and physical abuse. Most importantly, Sister A and Sister B had the opportunity to speak. These young women, now older and no longer under Kimmery's control, could tell the court about what they had experienced and how it had affected them. Their statements were powerful and heartbreaking. They described years of suffering, of hunger, of cold nights sleeping outside, of beatings and humiliation. They described feeling worthless and unloved. They described the psychological scars that would be with them for the rest of their lives. The prosecutor argued for a substantial sentence. While Kimmery hadn't killed the girls, what she had done was torture them over a period of years. She had violated her duty as an adoptive parent in the most fundamental way. The defense likely argued for some leniency, perhaps presenting evidence of Kimmery's own difficult background or other mitigating factors. But there is no excuse for systematically abusing children. The judge, in pronouncing sentence, noted the particular vulnerability of the victims, adopted children who had been taken into Kimmery's home with the expectation of safety and care, only to be subjected to years of abuse. Kimmery Jorg was sentenced to 20 years in prison, plus lifetime probation. The 20-year sentence ensures that Kimmery will spend a substantial portion of her adult life behind bars. And the lifetime probation means that even when she's released from prison, she will be under supervision for the rest of her life, with strict conditions on her conduct. Kimmery Jorg is currently incarcerated in the Arizona Department of Corrections, serving her 20-year sentence. She has been in prison for approximately 6 years now and has many more years to serve. When she is eventually released, she will be subject to lifetime probation, meaning she will never truly be free from supervision and restrictions on her conduct. She will likely never be allowed to have custody of or unsupervised contact with children again. She will have to report regularly to a probation officer. She will have conditions on where she can live and work. Meanwhile, Sister A and Sister B are rebuilding their lives. They have been removed from the abusive environment and placed in safe situations where they can heal and grow. But the damage Kimmery inflicted on them will never fully heal. They will carry the scars, physical and emotional, for the rest of their lives. They will struggle with trust, with relationships, with feeling worthy of love and care. Research on childhood abuse, particularly severe and prolonged abuse like what Sister A and Sister B experienced, shows that the effects can be devastating and long-lasting. Children who are abused often struggle with bullet operator post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD, bullet operator depression and anxiety, bullet operator difficulty forming healthy relationships, bullet operator trust issues, bullet operator low self-esteem, bullet operator difficulty regulating emotions. Bullet operator physical health problems related to the stress and trauma they experienced. Sister A and Sister B will need ongoing therapy and support to process what they went through and to build healthy, fulfilling lives despite their traumatic start. The good news is that with proper support, many survivors of childhood abuse do go on to live successful, meaningful lives. They can heal, though they will always carry the scars of what they experienced. This case raises difficult questions about the adoption and foster care systems. Sister A and Sister B were placed with Kimmery and Thomas Jorg through the adoption system. They were supposed to be going to a safe, loving home. Instead, they were placed in an environment where they would be subjected to years of abuse. Did the system fail these girls? Were there warning signs that were missed during the adoption process? Was there adequate follow-up after the adoption to ensure the girls were being properly cared for? These are important questions that deserve examination, though the specific details of how Sister A and Sister B came to be placed with the Jorgs haven't been fully made public. What is clear is that the adoption and foster care systems, while generally well-intentioned, are not perfect. Children can sometimes be placed in homes where they will be abused, and follow-up monitoring may be inadequate to catch abuse before it becomes severe. This case underscores the need for thorough vetting of adoptive parents, ongoing monitoring of adopted children's welfare, and robust systems for children to report abuse and for others to recognize and report signs of abuse. The case of Kimmery Jorg and her abuse of Sister A and Sister B offers several important lessons. First, it demonstrates that child abuse often involves differential treatment of children in the same household. When one child is singled out for abuse while others are treated normally, that child is at extreme risk. Second, it highlights the particular vulnerability of adopted and foster children. These children may feel they have nowhere to turn, may not know how to seek help, and may feel that they should be grateful for having a home even if that home is abusive. Third, it shows the importance of teachers, doctors, neighbors, and others being alert to signs of abuse and willing to report concerns. Someone eventually noticed that something was wrong with Sister A and Sister B and reported it. That intervention saved these girls from continued abuse and possibly death from starvation. Finally, it reminds us that child abuse can take many forms. While Kimmery Jorg didn't kill her daughters, what she did to them over a period of years was torture. And our legal system rightly treats such conduct as serious criminal behavior deserving of substantial punishment. Unlike the other cases in this documentary, Sister A and Sister B survived. They are alive today, working to heal from what they experienced and to build good lives for themselves. These young women showed tremendous courage in speaking out about the abuse they suffered. They testified against Kimmery Jorg, helping to ensure that she would be held accountable for what she had done. They deserve privacy and respect as they continue their healing journeys. But they also deserve recognition for their strength and resilience. Sister A and Sister B endured years of suffering that no child should ever have to experience. They survived when they could have died from the starvation and abuse. And they are now working to move forward despite the trauma they carry. Their story is a reminder that even in the darkest situations, the human spirit can endure. And with proper support and care, survivors of even the most horrific abuse can go on to live meaningful, successful lives. While Kimmery Jorg's case differs from the others in this documentary, her victims survived rather than dying. It deserves inclusion because the severity of the abuse was extreme and because Kimmery will spend decades paying for what she did. The 20-year sentence plus lifetime probation ensures that Kimmery Jorg will never again have the opportunity to abuse children. And her case serves as a reminder that our society takes child abuse seriously and will hold abusers accountable, even when the victims survive. Kimmery Jorg betrayed her duty as an adoptive mother. She took two vulnerable girls into her home, and, instead of providing the love and care they desperately needed, she subjected them to years of torture and abuse. She will spend the next decade and beyond in prison paying for that betrayal. And when she is finally released, she will remain under supervision for the rest of her life. Meanwhile, Sister A and Sister B are working to build the lives they deserve, lives free from abuse, filled with safety, love, and opportunity to become whoever they want to be. Thank you for watching this final case. If you followed this entire documentary, please show your support by liking this video and subscribing to Cold Case Time. Your engagement helps us continue bringing these important stories to light. We've examined 10 of the most disturbing cases of maternal filicide and severe child abuse ever prosecuted in Arizona. 10 mothers who betrayed the most sacred duty of parenthood to protect and nurture their children. Rachel Henry, who suffocated her 3 babies and arranged their bodies as if they were sleeping. Retta Cruse, who poisoned her 2 young daughters before later taking her own life in prison. Inoue, who brutally killed her 2 children with a meat cleaver. Connie Villa, who murdered her 13-year-old daughter and attempted to kill her other children and ex-husband. Vallow Daybell, the Doomsday Mom, whose twisted beliefs led to multiple deaths across state lines. Jerice Hunter, who murdered her 5-year-old daughter and disposed of her body so thoroughly it has never been found. Elizabeth Archibeque, who starved her 6-year-old son to death in a closet. Denise Snow-Ingram, whose extreme neglect led to her 16-month-old daughter's death from malnutrition. Phoeteama Neal, who drowned her 20-month-old daughter in a bathtub. And Kimmery Jorg, who subjected her 2 adopted daughters to years of starvation, beatings, and torture. These 10 women will never see freedom again. They will spend decades, if not the rest of their lives, behind prison walls, paying for the unspeakable crimes they committed against the most innocent among us, their own children. If you appreciate our in-depth coverage of these critical cases, please take a moment to hit that like button to let us know this content is valuable to you. Subscribe to Cold Case Time so you never miss our future documentaries. Comment below with your thoughts on these cases and what more can be done to protect vulnerable children. Share this video with others who care about child welfare and criminal justice. Your engagement helps us continue bringing these important stories to light and honoring the memories of victims who can no longer speak for themselves. Thank you for being part of the Cold Case Time community. Together, we're ensuring these victims are never forgotten. Until next time, stay safe, protect the vulnerable, and never stop seeking justice.